Welcome to English Voice Stories, where history comes alive and stories ignite the imagination. Today we embark on an incredible, perhaps controversial journey with a man whose name is known across the globe, Christopher Columbus. Love him or see his complex legacy, his life is a thrilling saga of daring dreams, relentless struggle, blind faith, and world-altering consequences. From a boy who gazed at the sea to a man who mistakenly stumbled upon a new world, forever changing the course of history for millions. This is the story of Christopher Columbus, a tale that will improve your English and keep you captivated till the very end. Are you ready? Grab your headphones, settle in, and let's dive into the waves of history. It all began not in a palace or a grand city center, but in the bustling port city of Genoa, Italy, way back in 1451. In a humble home lived a boy named Cristoforo Colombo. His father was a weaver, a good, honest trade, but young Cristoforo's eyes weren't fixed on threads and looms. They were constantly drawn to the horizon, where the vast, shimmering sea met the sky. Genoa was a city of ships, sailors, and exotic goods arriving from faraway lands. Every day, Cristoforo would listen to the sailors' tales, stories of storms, distant shores, strange peoples, and incredible riches like silks and spices from the East. These stories filled his young mind, sparking a fire that would burn for the rest of his life. He learned the basics from his father, but his real classroom was the docks, the ships, and the endless water. He didn't get much formal schooling, but he was smart, observant, and quick to learn the practical skills of navigation, how to read the stars at night, understand the winds, and use the basic maps available then. As he grew older, Cristoforo, or Christopher as he is known in English, became a sailor himself. He sailed on various ships across the Mediterranean and even up to the colder waters of the North Atlantic, possibly visiting places like England and Ireland. With each voyage, his skills grew sharper, his understanding of the sea deepened, and his confidence as a mariner solidified. But it wasn't just about sailing the known routes. Christopher was a dreamer. In his era, the most valuable goods like spices and silk came from Asia, India, China, and the legendary Spice Islands. These goods traveled along long, difficult, and often dangerous land routes or sea routes through the Mediterranean, controlled by various powers. It was a slow and expensive process. Christopher started poring over maps, charts, and books. He read about the Earth being round, an idea known among educated people for centuries, contrary to the popular myth that everyone thought it was flat. But Christopher had a different idea from the traditional routes. Why sail east, facing all those obstacles and middlemen? Why not sail west across the great Atlantic Ocean? If the world was round, surely sailing west would eventually lead you to the east. It was a bold, almost audacious idea. Most experts of the time agreed the Earth was round, but they believed the distance across the Atlantic to Asia was much greater than Christopher calculated. He had studied ancient texts, including the work of Ptolemy and others, but he significantly underestimated the size of the Earth and completely missed the existence of two entire continents lying in between Europe and Asia. But Christopher was convinced. His faith in his calculations, however flawed, was unshakable. He dreamed of finding a direct, westward sea route to the riches of the East. He imagined the glory, the wealth, the titles, and the place in history that such a discovery would bring him. This dream consumed him, but turning the dream into reality required ships, supplies, and sailors, and that required money, lots of money. Christopher was just a weaver's son, a sailor, with no vast fortune or noble connections. So began the hardest part of his journey, convincing someone, a powerful king or queen, to fund his crazy, risky idea. He started pitching his plan. First, he went to the King of Portugal, John II. Portugal was a leader in exploration at the time, known for sailing down the coast of Africa. Christopher presented his maps and his calculations. The king's advisors listened, they checked his numbers, and they shook their heads. "Your calculations are wrong, Columbus," they likely said. "The distance is too great. You will sail into the endless ocean and never return." Rejection. Undeterred, Christopher moved to Spain, hoping to gain the support of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Spain was busy with war, trying to drive out the last Moorish rulers from Granada, but Christopher was persistent. For years, he followed the Spanish court, waiting for an audience, explaining his plan over and over. He showed them his maps, spoke passionately about the potential wealth and glory. He made grand demands. He wanted to be made admiral of the ocean sea, viceroy and governor of any new lands he found, and receive 10% of all revenues from those lands. His demands were considered outrageous. Meeting after meeting, the answer was the same: no. The experts advised the monarchs that Columbus's plan was unsound. His distance estimates were too low. Years turned into a decade. Christopher remained in Spain, living in relative poverty, sometimes relying on the kindness of others, his dreams seemingly fading with each passing year. It was a time of immense frustration and despair. He was a man with a world-changing idea, but nobody believed him enough to stake the fortune required. Just when it seemed his dream was dead, after Granada was conquered in 1492, Queen Isabella, perhaps persuaded by his unwavering faith, or perhaps seeing a chance to gain an advantage over Portugal, decided to take the gamble. Legend says she even offered to pawn her jewels, though this is debated. The truth is, the Spanish crown, after years of war, finally had the resources and the opportunity. They agreed to fund his voyage, albeit under difficult negotiations, where Columbus refused to lower his demands, almost leading to failure again. Finally, an agreement was reached. The capitulations of Santa Fe were signed. Christopher Columbus, the persistent dreamer, was given his chance. Now came the task of preparing the expedition. 3 ships were gathered. The largest, the Santa Maria, which Columbus captained, and 2 smaller caravels, the Pinta and the Niña. Finding a crew was difficult. Sailors were superstitious. The idea of sailing into the unknown, across the vast Sea of Darkness, as the Atlantic was sometimes called, filled them with fear. Rumors circulated about sea monsters, boiling waters, and the possibility of getting lost forever. It took effort, persuasion, and possibly even some recruitment from jails to assemble a crew of around 90 men. On August 3, 1492, the 3 small ships set sail from Palos, Spain. The journey was long, uncertain, and fraught with tension. The ships were tiny compared to today's vessels. Exposed to the elements, weeks turned into months. The crew grew restless, then fearful, and finally mutinous. They saw no land, only the endless, empty ocean day after day. They pleaded with Columbus to turn back. They feared they had sailed too far, that the winds that brought them west would prevent them from ever returning east. But Christopher Columbus, the man who had waited years for this moment, refused to give up. He used all his skills of leadership, persuasion, and perhaps even deception. Some accounts say he kept 2 logs of the distance traveled, one shorter to ease the crew's fears. He reminded them of the potential riches and glory. He watched the sea and the sky constantly for any sign of land. Birds, changes in the water color, clouds forming in a certain way. The tension on board was immense. The crew was on the verge of open rebellion. Columbus needed land, and he needed it soon. Then early in the morning of October 12, 1492, a lookout on the Pinta, named Rodrigo de Triana, shouted the most anticipated words of the voyage. "Tierra! Tierra! Land! Land!" The joy and relief that swept through the ships were immeasurable. Tears were shed, prayers were offered. They had done it. They had sailed west and reached the East Indies, just as Columbus had predicted, or so he believed. They landed on a small island in what is now the Bahamas. The people who lived there, the Taíno people, were unlike anyone the Europeans had ever seen. Columbus described them as peaceful, gentle, and generous. He called them Indians, believing he had arrived in the East Indies. This simple geographical error would have massive, tragic consequences. Columbus and his men explored the island briefly, claiming it for Spain and naming it San Salvador. They encountered the native people, exchanged some small gifts. Columbus was eager to find the source of gold that the natives sometimes wore. He also immediately began thinking about the potential for enslaving the people he had found. His journals reflect this dual perspective: admiration for their innocence combined with calculating thoughts of exploitation. The expedition continued, exploring other islands in the Caribbean, including Cuba, which he thought might be mainland China, and Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti and Dominican Republic. They searched for gold, encountered different groups of indigenous people, and learned about the local environment. Disaster struck on Christmas Eve, 1492, when the Santa Maria ran aground and was wrecked off the coast of Hispaniola. Using the timbers from the ship, Columbus established a small settlement called La Navidad, leaving behind about 40 men. In early 1493, Columbus set sail back to Spain with the Niña and Pinta, bringing with him some gold, exotic plants, animals, and several captured Taino people to present to the monarchs. The return journey was also perilous, facing severe storms. When he finally arrived back in Spain in March 1493, he was a hero. The news of his discovery spread like wildfire across Europe. He was received with great honor by Ferdinand and Isabella. He presented his findings, exaggerating the amount of gold found and the proximity to Asia, fueling the European imagination with visions of immense wealth. Columbus was granted the titles he had demanded: Admiral of the Ocean Sea, Viceroy, and Governor. The age of exploration, as we know it, had truly begun, all thanks to one man's relentless pursuit of a dream, but the story and its true, darker impact was far from over. Columbus made 3 more voyages to the Americas in the following years: 1493, 1498, 1502. These were not just voyages of exploration, but of colonization. A much larger fleet and many more men sailed with him. The goal was now clear: establish permanent settlements, find gold and other resources, and convert the native populations to Christianity. However, governing the new territories proved incredibly difficult. Columbus was a skilled mariner, but a poor administrator. The Spanish settlers he brought were often unruly, more interested in getting rich quickly than building a stable colony. More devastatingly, the arrival of the Europeans brought disease: smallpox, measles, influenza, against which the indigenous populations had no immunity. These diseases spread rapidly and caused catastrophic death rates, wiping out entire communities. Furthermore, Columbus and his men, driven by the insatiable hunger for gold and resources, began to brutally exploit the native people. They were forced to work in mines and on plantations under harsh conditions. Those who resisted were met with extreme violence, enslavement, and slaughter. The peaceful people Columbus initially described were subjected to horrific cruelty, their societies shattered. La Navidad was found destroyed upon his return on the second voyage, likely due to conflict arising from the Spanish men left behind, mistreating the natives. Columbus established new, larger settlements, but the pattern of exploitation and conflict continued and worsened. Complaints about Columbus's harsh rule, his mistreatment of both native people and Spanish settlers, reached the ears of the king and queen. On his third voyage, things were so bad that a royal commissioner was sent to investigate. In 1500, Christopher Columbus, the celebrated admiral and viceroy, was arrested in Hispaniola and sent back to Spain in chains, a humiliating downfall. Although he was later freed and allowed a fourth voyage, he never fully regained the trust and standing he once had with the monarchs. He returned from his final voyage in 1504, ill and still embroiled in legal disputes over the wealth and titles he felt he was owed. Christopher Columbus died in Valladolid, Spain, on May 20th, 1506. To his dying day, he likely believed he had found a westward route to Asia, remaining largely unaware of the true magnitude of his discovery: 2 continents previously unknown to Europe. The impact of his voyages was immense and has 2 sides. On one hand, his journey undeniable opened up new sea routes, initiated contact between Europe and the Americas on a large scale, leading to the Columbian Exchange, a vast transfer of plants, animals, culture, human populations, technology, diseases, and ideas between the Old World and the New World. This exchange fundamentally reshaped the global environment, economy, and demography. On the other hand, his arrival marked the beginning of centuries of European colonization in the Americas, leading to the devastating decline of indigenous populations through disease, violence, and enslavement. His actions and the system he initiated laid the groundwork for immense suffering in the transatlantic slave trade. Today, Christopher Columbus's legacy is deeply complex and highly debated. For centuries, he was celebrated as a heroic explorer who discovered America. More recently, there is a wider understanding and condemnation of the horrific consequences his arrival had for the indigenous peoples who already lived there. He is seen by many not as a discoverer, but as an invader who brought destruction. Finally, his story teaches us many things. It shows the incredible power of ambition, perseverance, and believing in a dream against all odds. But it also stands as a stark reminder of the devastating, often unintended, consequences of exploration and conquest driven by greed and cultural superiority. It forces us to look beyond the simple narrative of discovery and confront the profound human cost of his voyages. History is not just about dates and events. It's about understanding the lives impacted and the long shadows cast by individual actions and decisions. It teaches us to view historical figures and events with a critical eye, recognizing both their achievements and their profound failures and the suffering they caused. Thank you for joining us on this challenging but essential journey through history. Remember, understanding the past, in all its complexity, is key to building a better future. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to English Voice Stories for more exciting stories that help you learn English while exploring history. See you in the next story.